Welcome to the Similar Fighters presentation, where we'll be looking at fighter jets that look similar. Okay, let's start off the presentation with these four aircraft.
Okay, starting in the upper left-hand corner, we have the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor. It's the original stealth fighter that's actually a fighter as compared to the F-117. The F-22 has two engines that are thrust vectoring in the up and down direction. It's very angular, so be on the lookout for all those similar looking angles on the aircraft. To its side, we have the Sukhoi Su-57 Felon. This is a Russian stealth fighter. You can see some of the unstealthy characteristics on it, being the two engines that are fully thrust vectoring but are quite exposed at the back. People say that this is because the Russian stealth doctrine only matters in the forward view of the aircraft, and seeing it from behind doesn't really matter. We'll see how that pans out for them. You'll also notice on the Su-57 that it does have the little FLIR camera bump on its nose. Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II has a bump under its nose as compared to the Su-57, and that bump is also for IR cameras among other sensors. The F-35 is a single-engine fighter. It's also stealth like the other two listed before, but the body of the aircraft is a lot more thick-looking and it's not quite as angular. There are several different variants of the F-35, but for right now we'll just worry about this one. To its right we have the Boeing FA-18, in this case an F because it's a two-seater Super Hornet. This aircraft is basically a larger, better, faster upgrade of the normal legacy Hornets. The way to tell it apart is the size, and also the main feature to look for is the size of the big boxy intakes compared to the rounded intakes of the legacy Hornets.
Okay, here we have in the upper left-hand corner the Chengdu J-20, notable for its canard design. The Shenyang J-31, which is a knockoff F-35, notable for the engines and the somewhat F-22-like nose. And then I figured I'd put in the Mitsubishi X2 Shinshin in the bottom just to give a comparison to the other aircraft because of the similar overall look. The McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle is an air superiority fighter and has never experienced a loss in air-to-air combat. It has two large boxy intakes that are quite distinctive. The wing and leading edge extensions are also unique to this design. One feature of note is the difference in size between the pods on the top of the twin vertical tails. The Grumman F-14 Tomcat is the star of the movie Top Gun. It has a famous swing wing design, and its powerful engines are spaced quite far apart, allowing for missiles to be carried under its belly. The F-14 always will have two seats, and the targeting pod under the nose is quite distinctive. The Sukhoi Su-27 Flanker is a Russian air superiority fighter. Its wings are swept significantly from both the leading edge and the trailing edge. Leading edge extensions have a smooth curve, and along with the pods sticking out rearward between the engines, this aircraft should not be mistaken for its Western counterparts. The Mikoyan MiG-29 Fulcrum is a small aircraft compared to many other fighters. It does have large, distinctive and kinked tails, and the intakes are boxy with straight lines, and the intakes can be covered on the ground for FOD. There are also distinctive intakes on the top of the aircraft near the shoulders. The General Dynamics, or Lockheed Martin F-16 Fighting Falcon, is one of the most common frontline fighters in the world today. It's defined by its small size, bubble canopy, single tail, and large scoop under its belly, feeding the single engine. It is, of course, most well known for being the aircraft used by the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. The AIDC F-CK-1 Chengkuo is an indigenous fighter from Taiwan. It has a twin engine configuration, single tail, and it is a light fighter that takes a lot of similarity from the early FA-18s from the intakes, and overall shape similar to that of the F-16. Now the Kai T-50 Golden Eagle fills many roles in South Korea. It's mainly a trainer, but there are also light fighter, attack, and electronic warfare variants. This aircraft is also equipped with FA-18 style intakes, but this one has a single engine and resembles an F-16 with the exception of the top of its tail fin, which is kind of cut off at a downward angle. The Mitsubishi F2 is basically a big blue F-16 made jointly by Mitsubishi and Lockheed Martin. The F2 has a three-piece canopy, larger wings, larger tail surfaces, and a larger intake, and they're almost always seen in the blue camo. The Pak JF-17 Thunder, also known as the CAC JF-17 Xiaolong, is a joint Chinese-Pakistani venture. It is a single-seat, single-engine multi-role fighter. It has thin fins just under the tail, as well as thin intakes and large leading-edge root extensions. The Yaklev Yak-130 mitten, seen here in the upper right-hand corner, is almost identical to the Aermacchi M346 Master, as they were developed together. Now, the M346 Master does have spikes on its shoulders, which does distinguish it from the Yak-130. Both of them have the same configuration with the engines, which are quite identifiable. Now the Northrop F-5E Tiger II, shown in the bottom left-hand corner, is a light fighter. It has tiny, thin little wings, two not very powerful engines. The intakes on this aircraft do kind of pinch in toward the middle of the plane, and you may know it from the movie Top Gun as the MiG-28, or you may know its training variant, the Northrop T-38 Talon. Now in the bottom right-hand corner we have the Dassault Mirage F1. Yes, it is a Mirage, even though it's not a Delta wing. And it has a high shoulder-mounted wing, unlike many of the other Mirage configurations. The Dassault None Rafale. This aircraft is shaped like a plus sign when viewed from the front. Its intakes are also set a little bit further back than most of the other aircraft seen here. The Rafale has two nose wheels, and there's also a naval variant called the Rafale M. The Eurofighter EF-2000 Typhoon is a purely land-based fighter. This aircraft has twin engines, as well as twin boxy intakes, which are quite distinctive. The aircraft also has a rounded wingtip instead of the normal missile mounting rails that you'll see on the other aircraft seen here. The Chengdu J-10 Vigorous Dragon does not have the previously mentioned wingtips, but it is pretty similar to the EF-2000 Typhoon, with the exception that it's a single-engine fighter. It also doesn't have the split in the middle of the intakes, and there are some small fins underneath the tail. An aircraft that's similar to the J-10 is the Saab JAS-39 Gripen. This aircraft is also a single-engine fighter, but one of the main identifying features compared to the J-10 is the placement of the intakes. These are high and to the side of the pilot. The North American F-86 Sabre is the main jet aircraft the United States Air Force is famous for using during the Korean War. It has a small black hump on its nose for the gun radar, and its elevator is mounted just above the exhaust for the engine. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15 Faggot is similar to the F-86. Differences include the fact that the MiG-15 has an elevator mounted higher up on its tail, a split in the intake, cannons on the nose, and wing fences, specifically 2 on each wing. The MiG-15 is not capable of afterburning. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17 Fresco is very similar to the MiG-15, but it has an afterburning engine, 3 wing fences, and is most famous for serving in the Vietnam War. The Saab 29 Tunen is fitted with a mid-mounted wing, and its tail extends further behind and above the exhaust, and that tail is more square than the other aircraft pictured here. The Vought F-8 Crusader is found in the upper left-hand corner. It is a fighter jet of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. It has a small radome with a small intake underneath of it, two cannons on either side of the cockpit underneath, and it has a mounting rail for missiles on the side of the aircraft underneath the wings. The wings on the F-8 can actually tilt backward to help with the carrier landings for the aircraft, and there are some strakes underneath the tail near the engine, and that tail itself is pretty small and pretty swept. To its right we have the LTV A7 Corsair II, which is in the same family as the F-8 Crusader. The V in LTV stands for Vought. You can see a lot of similarities between the two aircraft, but one of the differences is that the wing on the A7 does not tilt backward. The radome is more rounded, and the fact that there are usually a lot more hard points found on the A7's wings. Now, the North American F-100 Super Sabre in the bottom left is an American fighter jet. It is one of the first supersonic jets that we had. Sometimes you'll see it with a much smaller tail fin. It also, like the F-8, has forward 20mm cannons, although these are more under the nose. The intake for the F-100 is very oval shaped and fairly unique, and the elevator for the F-100 is mounted on the bottom of the plane near the engine, which is a kind of unique placement, though it is similar to the other aircraft seen here. Now in the bottom right we have the Republic F-105 Thunderchief. This aircraft is technically a fighter, although it was mainly used as a bomber and light strike aircraft during the Vietnam War. It also has a very small tail fin, but the main distinctive feature about it is the very interesting looking intakes that you'll see from some other views, where they actually kind of sweep forward and then come back in as they get closer to the fuselage. This aircraft is also fairly recognizable for the shape of the cockpit and the single strake underneath the tail. Okay, in the upper left-hand corner we have the McDonnell FH Phantom. This is the Phantom that makes the F4 the Phantom II. This is also not a McDonnell Douglas. This is before that period of history. So this is a carrier-borne jet fighter. One of the big recognition features is the fact that the engine is mounted inside the little hump on the wing there and is very hard to access, which made it quite hard to maintain. To its right, you'll see the McDonnell F2H Banshee. This aircraft has a little bit more of a reasonable engine design, where you can see a larger portion of the engine near the back half of it. And also the tailplane is not canted up as much as the FH Phantom. And in the bottom left we have the Grumman F9F Panther, and to its right we have the Grumman F9F Cougar, the main difference between the two being the swept wings, and these two aircraft are of course very similar, both having the very sleek lines, single engine, two intakes on the side, and the higher tail mounted above the exhaust for that engine. Okay, starting in the upper left-hand corner, we have the McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom II. This is a multi-role fighter that saw heavy service during the Vietnam War. It was also used by the United States Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps. It is a tandem setup with a pilot and a Wizzo, or Rio, and it has downward pointed tails, and the wingtips are pointed upward. There is also a very large square rectangular plate in front of the engine intakes that is pretty distinctive for the F4. Now to its right we have the Sepicat Jaguar. Its wing is mounted much higher than the F4's is, as well as the intakes being smaller and more boxy. The Sepicat Jaguar is also a single-seat aircraft. So the Mitsubishi F1 in the bottom left corner is kind of like a mix between a Sepicat Jaguar and the F4 Phantom, especially in this paint scheme. The Mitsubishi F1 has a much higher mounted wing, a higher mounted intake, but the tails do point downward, much like an F4, and the overall setup is, again, just pretty much a mix between the two aircraft. And then to its right we have the Avioan Craiova IAR-93 Volture. That's kind of obvious from the side of the aircraft having that painted on there. But it's also produced in Serbia as the Sukhoi J-22 Aral. This is a more sleek looking design than the Sepicat Jaguar, and the landing gear are also pretty distinctive to the IAR-93, although the Jaguar does have a similar set of landing gear.